My name is Mary, and my presentation is over the changing family dynamic, and it is an analysis of family films. You'll have to bear with me, I'm not very familiar with all this technology, and it's been a huge test. So here we go, just a brief interview or introduction. As I said, the topic for this project is a portrayal of the family unit. I did decide to do a film analysis, that way I can analyze both PG movies and PG-13 movies from the past 3 years, so 2015 to 2018. The overall question I had for this assignment was, how are the different family units and family dynamics portrayed in these films? I did add a couple definitions here at the bottom. Nuclear family, you will hear me reference that. I also reference it as the traditional family. It is defined as a family group that consists of a father, a mother, and their children. I did also list a definition for family unit. It's the basic unit in society traditionally consisting of two parents rearing their children. So again, very similar to the nuclear family or the traditional family. While researching this topic, I did come across a couple interesting points that I wanted to reference here in this section. The first thing I really wanted to point out was pretty obvious, but it's just the fact that the traditional family dynamic has changed so drastically over the past decade. This has been because of the legalization of same-sex marriages, how it's become easier for older parents to adopt and have kids, and even just shifting so much as couples getting divorced and parents dating and living together without being married but still raising their children. Another quick little fact that I found, according to the 2010 census, over 100,000 same-sex couples are raising more than 200,000 children. So that's pretty much double the amount of couples per children per couple, sorry. A lot of marriages have been delayed until later years, so couples are dating a lot longer. Maybe they're having kids before they get married, and they wait a couple years to get married. That has become very common. Marriages are less sustainable than previous decades. Divorces are becoming more common, separations, so on and so forth. Non-marital births have increased in numbers as well as proportion of the U.S. births. So, multiple partner fertility is more common than in previous decades as well. And this tends to describe a new U.S. population as a whole. So, moving on to the methods and code sheet, I do have here an example of the code sheet that I use to analyze these movies. You'll see that I have movie 1 through 4 listed on both sides. I also added a legend at the bottom, so it would be easy to tell which movie goes where on the code sheet. I did have my themes, which I overall looked at parent guardianship, the relationship of the parents or guardians, the sexual orientation of that relationship, and how those children are in that family, meaning are they adopted, biological, foster, or have they simply just taken them in? So those are some of the themes that I did look at when analyzing these films. You can see that I did pick 8 movies, as I've mentioned. 4 of them were PG and 4 of them were PG-13. I did mention also that the time frame was the last 3 years, so 2015 to the current year, which is 2018. And I also put them in chronological order, so the older movies are first and the newer movies are last for both sides. When selecting these movies, I picked the platforms Netflix and Hulu because those were just easily accessible to me, and it alleviated me having to go and purchase movies. So let's move on to results. So here's just a brief overview of the results. I went ahead and added the legend again just for reference. I'm going to pull up the results in a different little window so I can move on and have the kind of film analysis on the side. Um, so the first movie I analyzed was The Great Gilly Hopkins. This was filmed in 2015. So just really quick, the results for this movie, you'll notice that I did mark both grandparent and foster parent. I did this because towards the end of the film, Gilly does end up being placed with her grandmother on her mother's side. But for the majority of the movie, she was in foster care, so I did go ahead and mark foster parent as well. Um, I focused mainly on the relationship of the foster parents because that was the majority of the movie, as I mentioned. So the relationship for that, she was widowed and she was married to a man, so it was a heterosexual relationship. And her children were all foster children. They weren't biological. Um, but I should have marked biological for the grandparents. I just thought that might have been a little too confusing. So over here I just have a brief overview of the movie. The next movie I analyzed was Moana. That was shot in 2016. So just briefly, her parents, she was raised by her parents, they were married, they were heterosexual, and their children were biological. Moving on to Wonder. That was movie number 3 for PG, shot in 2017. Again, same as Moana. The kids were raised by their parents, they were married, it was a heterosexual relationship, and they were biological. And again, here's a brief overview of the movie. And Hope Springs Eternal was the last movie I analyzed for the PG section, and I got a little bit different results for this one. She was raised by her mother, so I did mark parents. It did not specify whether she had been married or if she was separated, but I did mark dating and other. I marked other because it didn't specify before, but towards the end of the movie, her mom did end up going on a couple dates. So that's why I added that in there as well. And again, heterosexual and biological children. Moving on to PG-13 movies, the first movie I analyzed was Daddy's Home. This one, I had kind of a difficult time deciding which parent to mark because it was both biological parents and step-parents. So I just went ahead and marked parents because they were both taking care of the children. The biological parents were divorced. It was a heterosexual relationship, and their children were biological. However, in this movie, Brad was married, and he was a stepfather who also was taking care of the children. And yes, they were, the biological parents were divorced. That's why I marked divorce for that. The next movie I analyzed was Before I Wake. That was shot in 2016, movie number 2. These parents were foster parents, so the results were a little different. They were married, heterosexual, and as I mentioned, they took in foster kids. In the beginning of the movie, they did have a biological son, but right away they mentioned that he had drowned. So the whole focus of the movie was on this foster son that they had taken, and that's why I marked foster instead of biological. The third movie for PG-13 was Gifted. This was probably the most different results that I got. This was Frank, who was raising his niece. So she was being raised by her relative. Um, he was dating. There, towards the end, again, that's why I marked both dating and single, because for the majority of the movie, he was single, focusing on just taking care of his niece. But again, towards the last couple minutes of the movie, he did go on a date. So, and that date was a very important part of the ending. So that's why I marked dating as well. And then heterosexual, but this time she was taken in. She wasn't adopted. She wasn't his biological daughter. Um, it was just his niece that he took in after his sister passed away. So for the last movie, I analyzed Sierra Burgess is a Big Loser. It was filmed in 2018. This movie was probably not the best movie to pick for this project, but I picked it because she had such a close relationship with her parents, and although that wasn't the main focus of the movie, I thought that the relationship was important enough to mention, so that's why I kind of picked that movie. So there's just a brief overview of all those movies. I would like to go back to movie one to kind of just go a little more in depth about my findings. My hypothesis for this project was that due to the changing dynamics of the family, I thought that there would be more portrayal of same-sex marriages, families who were divorced, who were co-parenting, things like that. That was not the case for my findings. The majority of the movies I found were pretty straightforward, just biological families raising their biological children. 3 out of the 8 movies were, actually, 2 out of the 8 movies were non-biological, and 1 was taken in. So, my hypothesis really wasn't supported, but I did want to add that my train of thought just slipped away. I did want to add that based on the findings that I found just in researching before I even analyzed the movies, I did not see very many of these facts or this information portrayed in the movies that I watched. That could have been for a number of reasons. I think I had too small of a sample. I should have had more movies, but because of time, I wasn't able to go into as much depth as I would have wanted to. So, I would say I was pretty disappointed with my findings. I really did anticipate to see a wider variety of the dynamics of the family and how they have been changing. But as you can see by my results, it was pretty cut and dry. And here's just a couple of the references. I did list those at the end for you. Yeah, so that is my project. Thanks.